All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of our KASB advocacy updates of the new year. We've got a fantastic program for you over the next hour or so. As always, I'm Austin Harris, the Director of Member Engagement here at KASB. I'm joined by our fantastic advocacy team, Leah Fleiter, Mark Tallman, and Scott Rothschild. We've got with us here today from USA Kansas, G.A. Bowie. And a very special guest this afternoon, Representative Fred Patton, is here to talk with us a little bit about the start of the upcoming legislative session. For those of you that don't know Representative Patton, he's a former KASB president, Seaman USD 345 board member, and he's the chair of the House Judiciary Committee and Interim Committee on Kansas Emergency Management Act. So, Representative Patton, we appreciate you being here with us today. As we get started and look ahead to the next session, I'm wondering, what issues do you think we might be expecting from judiciary and KEEMA?
Yeah, so right out of the gate, we're going to deal with some emergency management legislation. This summer, in the special session, we passed a bill that put in some provisions to allow us to operate through COVID, and we all hoped and prayed that COVID would be gone by now. So January 26th, those provisions sunset. Well, we're going to need those provisions for a while. So both the Senate and House Judiciary Committees will have hearings next week to extend those sunsets out. I've not for sure seen what the Senate's bill looks like. I'm hoping it's fairly similar to mine, and it's for the most part just changing the sunsets. From there, I hope we take our time when we look at changes to KEMA. What we learned in the interim committee meetings is that for the vast majority of emergencies, the run-of-the-mill tornado, fire, flood, things most of us think about for a disaster, KEMA has worked just fine. I mean, there's not been a whole lot of concerns or issues brought forward. We just didn't ever plan for one that would last a year or 18 months or whatever this ends up lasting. And so there's some things that we need to tweak, some balance that we need to consider between executive and legislative branch. And so we'll have those discussions and see what changes we need to make. But I hope we make them not as a reaction to COVID and what we've seen, but instead, planning for what that next long-term disaster might be. Hopefully we never have one, but when we do, or if we do, then we should have good laws on the books that don't lead to a lot of confusion and fighting back and forth. So that's the approach I hope we'll take on the KEMA issue. Other judiciary stuff, normally at this point, one work day before session, I have a list of legislations that's coming, and I've heard a lot of things that people are bringing, but I don't have a lot of firm details on what that is yet. So we'll see what bills get introduced next week and who shows up. I mean, I always get legislation from the courts and law enforcement and district attorneys, those types of things. So we'll see what they bring forward. Hopefully some stuff that, like for example, our courts, we've been using audiovisual technology. I don't know if they're using Zoom, whatever they're using like this, but I think we found that we can increase access to justice by using technology. So there's legislation like that I hope comes that we'll deal with and make some good changes.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting session in a lot of ways. I'm sure planning for this legislative session has been an interesting process for you over the last several months. What kind of insights can you offer into what this legislative session might feel like and what it will kind of function as in this unique setting?
Yeah, it's going to be really strange for all of us, those legislators, the lobbyists, the constituents, you name it. Already, if you go down to the Capitol, our committee rooms most of the chairs have been removed where conferees would sit, and tables have been put up. That way we can spread legislators out 6 feet apart. They won't all be around the committee table. They'll be sitting at folding tables, in a sense, out in the gallery. Same thing if you go down to the House floor right now. And I haven't been there since yesterday, but when I went down yesterday, the entryway into our chamber was just full of our chairs because they've taken out every other chair. I don't know where they're going to put them. Maybe they leave them in the hallway. But so legislators, when we come into the chamber, we will be, again, 6 feet apart, every other desk. And then in both galleries, the one behind the speaker and then the one that people normally sit in, have been designated places for legislators to sit. So we will all be spread out. Instead of using the buttons on our desk to vote like we do in the House, instead we've got I say we have, I don't have it yet. We will have a program on our computers that will allow us to vote and those types of things. For those of you that follow us closely, you know, at 11 o'clock every day, the House comes, we gavel in session, we pray, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, we recognize some people, and then we usually debate legislation. That's not going to happen this year. We very well may still go into session every day at 11 o'clock, but we will not all gather together. I doubt we recognize many groups, those types of things. Instead, only when we need to come together to debate a bill or to vote will we come to the chamber together. So it won't be every day. It will be very limited, I assume. And because of that, I'm guessing we won't do as many bills won't make it through because of that as well. I mean, I doubt we do bills that name, you know, the state dance or new nice, like those types of things that can wait, certainly need to wait until we can return back to normal.
So without kind of the regular schedule that many people in the legislative world are accustomed to, what's going to be the best way to stay up to date on what's happening when the House may or may not be gaveling in to debate important legislation?
So they've told us that we'll have at least 24 hours notice of any time that we're expected to come back together. So I assume you will all get that same notice. They've certainly, I mean, that sounds like, you know, people could go back home and, you know, be in Wichita all week long. That's not the expectation. The expectation is that legislators will still be in the Capitol, ready to take action when need be. We'll still have committees every day. Those committees, my committee is going to be hybrid. You'll be able to, if you want to, as a committee member, be in person, great. We've got a spot for you and we'll spread out. If not, you can join in online. And we'll be able to do voting and that type of stuff that way. I'm hoping my committee rules say that you can be truly anywhere in the world to participate in a hearing, but when it comes time for us to vote on a bill or an amendment or something like that, the expectation is you will have to be in the Capitol. And not just like me with a fake Zoom background, but really. So just to be safe, I mean, we've got that decision by the Attorney General about, you know, how to be careful to make sure that our bills are truly legal and aren't challenged. And so I intend to try to enforce that with our committee votes as well. So it's just going to be really different. And while leadership has been planning for this for months, it's day by day we're getting information and we'll see what happens on Monday. I really more Tuesday. Monday, my understanding is we start swearing in at 2 o'clock like we always do, but we've got time slots. So I go down, I think at, 3:15 or something like that. That's when I go in to swear in. And then at 4 o'clock, by then, hopefully everyone's swore in, and then we all come back together to, you know, officially elect our officers and name our clerks and those types of things. So Monday, not much will happen other than that, but I know a number of committees will start meeting on Tuesday and we'll get the ball rolling.
So in that similar vein, what kind of advice do you have for people who might want to be communicating with their legislators during this session, both in a very practical sense, but also more philosophically during this session?
I mean, so practically, at least for me, I'm anticipating, you know, setting up Zoom meetings with groups and individuals and, you know, trying to interact virtually as much as we can, because while I have a decent sized office in the Capitol, as you guys know that have been there, many legislators don't. I mean, we stick a couple legislators in a small room and expect you to come in and squeeze in there too. Well, that's just not safe. And so I don't see a lot of one-on-one meetings. I doubt I'll see Mark standing in the hallway often to come up to, you know, grab me to tell me whatever he thinks. So we're going to have to, you know, come up with new ways to do that. And thankfully we've had 9 months now of trying out new technology, and we're all finally getting comfortable with it, except it looks like Chaim's been hidden in a cave somewhere for 9 months, but the rest of us have been working and trying out technology. And so we're just gonna have to keep going that route. You know, and not just, so not the practical standpoint, but the, you know, one-on-one meeting with people and the different diverse views and opinions. As always is the case at the beginning of a session, we've got a lot of new people. So I encourage you all to reach out to them now. Offer to have Zoom meetings or talk with them on the phone and get to know them. As I tell groups that, you know, maybe I don't see eye to eye with on their positions all the time, I encourage them to still develop relationships with me, because at the end of the day, it's if I know you and we've talked and and an issue comes up, I'm much more likely to hear you out and to, appreciate what you have to say than if you only come to me, once a year when you're mad about something and yell at me. Well, then, I'll still listen to you, but I know some legislators won't. So I think it's important that you right out of the gate begin laying groundwork and developing relationships with people. So that way, when we get to a point, it's something that you support or you don't support, you've had your conversations already and develop those relationships.
So Representative Patton, we've got a question in the chat and it's from Scott, so I could just let him unmute and ask the question. But he's wondering if you think any of the changes to KEMA will directly impact schools or if that potential exists.
So looking back at our KEMA meetings, we had both Representative Williams and Commissioner Watson come visit with us one day, and nothing we heard there was directly KEMA related, I don't think. I mean, maybe there's some changes that need to be proposed or want to be proposed that would impact schools one way or the other, but I don't think it's necessarily disaster related. The only issue I could think of is it did come up, the whole who has what authority. So does the State Board of Education have the authority to close schools? Does the governor? Do local school boards? That may be something that comes up. I've not, other than hearing that topic, no one's really brought it to me and asked me to include it in anything, but that's something that could come up, I guess.
So also from the chat, really just a question asking if you can provide any insight or clarification on whether or not more COVID funds are going to be coming to school districts, and whether or not this money should or could be used for mental health of staff and students. What do you know about those next steps in COVID relief?
So, and I only know this as a school board member, but my understanding is we're going to get quite an influx of money from the federal government for schools as a result of COVID. I think Randy had a meeting with some of you in the last couple of days and outlined that. I wouldn't anticipate any state COVID dollars unless it flows from the federal government to the state. While we are in a much better financial position than I thought we would be, the state still, we still have some budget issues to work through. So I wouldn't anticipate new state dollars, but if we can free up federal dollars or allow those dollars to flow through to get to schools, then I certainly see that happening. And there was a part 2 to the question. What was it?
Just whether this money should be used on mental health for staff and students.
I think we should give the local districts the flexibility. I mean, if districts need that money to spend it on mental health, then absolutely. So,
Lou, there is a section in what I'm calling the new CARES Act that says providing mental health services and supports. So that's in the ESSER 2, CARES Act 2.
And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more. We didn't send you all our agenda, unfortunately, but that is on the docket as well. While we wait for another question, since I am unmuted, as is so often the case, and thank you for that legislative advice on effective lobbying, Representative Patton. If I'd have had that 30 years ago, my career might have been different. But one of the things I think we've had a lot of talk about is this issue of state control versus local control. And, initially, I would say that some of what happened in the special session was a pushback against what was seen as maybe the governor's authority. And so, more power was kind of put back with county commissions and maybe indirectly school boards. And I just wonder if you have any sense of where people may come down on this idea. Everyone likes local control until your local person does something you don't like, and then you don't want them to be able to do it. And so someone else ought to be able to do that. Is that just one of those things that's going to be an irresolvable tension, or do you think there may be some reaction either way?
I mean, you summarized it well, Mark. We all advocate for local control. And like you said, you don't like it when your local person makes a decision you don't like. And heck, you all know as school leaders, I'm sure you didn't like having to make those decisions this fall. You would have preferred somebody else make them for you. So I get that. I mean, when we had the KEMA meetings, one of the questions I asked the committee was, do we want to repeal the provisions that gave counties the local control? And in fact, at first, no one on the committee even expressed any interest in taking that power away until I was a question or two further on. And I think it was Senator Francisco said, can we go back to that one? She's like, include that on the list. We should continue discussing whether or not we should take that local control back and give it to the governor. So just guessing, I suspect the legislature is going to be in favor of local control of some manner, and how we set that up yet, I don't know. We'll just have to see. I've got some ideas on just in general with the Emergency Management Act, how we maybe change the State Finance Council to something broader and more diverse and more representative of the state, and how all that ties together yet. I have yet to figure that out, but I'm working on it, and maybe that addresses some of that local control stuff as well.
We don't have any more questions in the chat. Leah, Mark, Scott, GA, do you have any specific questions for Representative Patton?
Nothing for me.
Okay. Well, Representative Patton, I'll give you kind of last word here, and thank you for your time with us today. We'll wish you the best of luck and health and safety in what's sure to be a unique legislative session. But any last thoughts or words you'd like to share with the group this afternoon?
No, just thank you all. I know as a local school board member that this has been one heck of a school year. And while we think we get things figured out, it all changes by the minute and the day. And yeah, we hope we figured virtual learning out and hybrid learning and everything else you're all trying. And I'm sure it's going to continue to change over the course of this school year. And so good luck with that. And as a legislator, if there's things we can help with, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to us. We don't all know what's going on in your schools, and we're not going to know if you don't tell us. So speak up, even if you have people who represent you, who you personally don't support and you didn't vote for, and you hope they never get reelected. You still need to develop those relationships, because you can't just write off 2 years or 4 years if they're a senator and hope that things get better. You need to develop the relationships, because some people just don't know. I mean, and if they hear from you, then they're in a better position to decide and make decisions. So that's my advice. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to me either. If you have a hard time getting in touch with somebody in the Capitol, shoot me an email or text, and I'll help with that. So good luck.
Fantastic. Thank you, Representative Patton. We're going to shift gears a little bit and jump to the federal level, and we've touched on it already, which, Leah, I think that means people want to know a little bit more about the COVID relief bill and what that might mean for them and their schools. So we'll turn it over to you for an update on where things stand there.
Thanks, Austin. So some of you may know some of these details. We learned through the excellent work of the National School Boards Association and our many federal partners that the COVID relief bill that was signed by the president, I think it was December 27th, will provide about $338 million overall to Kansas schools through what we're calling ESSER 2 or the CARES 2 funding. It's about 4 times what you all received from the first CARES Act, the original CARES Act that was enacted in March, which I think we all will agree seems like it was so long ago, and so many things have changed, and the landscape has changed so much for all of you that this additional funding is certainly going to come in handy. It is basically modeled after the same process that Congress used to direct the allocation of the CARES Act funding. It's basically allocated on your Title I status, and it may be used for any purposes that are authorized by the ESEA, the original law, that authorized, that was what ESEA was back in 1965, and then, it's been reauthorized since then. So it is essentially the same process and the same structure as the CARES Act. There have been a couple of, I think about 3 things added. You can now also use this funding to address learning loss, which can, include summer school. It can include after school programs, those types of things. It can be used to prepare schools to reopen after the pandemic, which many of you have done already, but that's in the bill. And there's also a mention of any efforts to improve school air quality. So basically, same structure as the CARES Act, just more money and a few additional allocated or authorized uses of that money. I'm putting in the chat a link to our KASB news brief story that we ran yesterday. You should have received the news brief in your email, and that's the link there to a rather lengthy analysis of the bill. The interesting, one interesting aspect of the bill is that, like the CARES Act, this new law also has a governor's education relief fund, a GEAR fund, that was about, it's about $4 billion total, but in contrast to the CARES Act, this bill specifically has $2.75 billion of the National GEARS Fund set aside for private schools. So that is something that we hear and we get pretty tense about. That money may not be used by states to set up vouchers or scholarships or tuition tax credits or anything like that. They must, however, prioritize that money for private schools who educate a significant amount of low-income students. And like the public school funding, it has to be distributed to schools that have significantly seen an impact because of COVID. And so, and a lot of that will be, is directed toward cleaning, sanitation, COVID testing, remote or hybrid learning expenses, which is interesting because, you know, we hear people say, well, you know, private schools are great because they've never had to close. They've all been meeting in person and everything is fine and lovely. And we know that just like the public schools, private schools are having to go in and out of in-person or COVID or remote as infection rates dictate. But nonetheless, that is in the bill. And of course, some transportation costs for private schools as well. So that is a very general overview. And I wanted to kick this over also to GA because, you know, GA as USA Kansas and his national association has also done quite a bit of work on this bill. And I think we want to talk about how GA $338 million sounds like a lot of money, but if it's allocated based on your Title I status, that changes the conversation quite a bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, it really does. When you kind of break the dollars down, it's when you look at it as a large chunk of money, it seems like a lot of money, and it truly is. But when you break it down per student and you break that into look at it a little differently, it looks vastly different because we have some districts that are only receiving, $50 to $60 per student, which really isn't going to go a long ways when you're talking some of the challenges we've had with COVID and changes and adjustments and additional staffing and transportation. Compared to other districts that may be receiving right around the $2,000 a student mark based upon their enrollment. So, you know, as you look at this, there's a wide variety. We probably have 60 to 70 school districts that are receiving over $1,000 per student. But at the same time, we've got a number of districts that are on the opposite end of that. And so that's one of the things I think we're gonna have to be very cautious. You know, this blanket idea that everybody can use this money for extended school year or summer school or PPEs or, you know, whatever the case may be, it's just not going to happen because the money just doesn't look the same. And it's not equalized. You know, in Kansas, we talk a lot about equalization of the dollars, and there's no equalization to this. So those are pieces we have to be very aware of, very cautious of, and not think that everybody's in the same boat that maybe we are.
GA, as we and for our audience, we had a discussion with some education advocates yesterday around this, and that is a critical thing, I think, to be aware of. In a sense, the distribution of money on Title I, which really looks at poverty, makes sense from a viewpoint that I think we're likely to find that from an academic damage viewpoint, those districts are probably going to have the most difficult time. But on an operational viewpoint, there's really no reason to believe that a high or low poverty school or district has a different need for masks or cleaning supplies or air quality. So I think that's really the issue. These dollars are probably going to be used in several different ways. And in some cases, this means there's no real connection or no total connection between what you're going to receive and what your needs might be. Similarly, as we discussed, it now looks like districts are going to be getting about 150 or have been allocated about $150 million or more from the county Sparks money. But that was purely at the discretion of the counties. Some districts got very little or none. Some got a significant portion of the money. So we have a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing out there that legislators are going to be aware of, but there was no comprehensive evaluation of need on the part of the state. And so that's going to be part of what local districts are going to have to be explaining to their legislators, is the position they're in and why, and how they're using the money and how it's meeting their needs or not.
Switching back to some specific federal concerns, I want to harp again on one of my favorite topics, and I know my friend Lou Martino also likes this topic, is the homework gap and broadband. We and GA's national organization and the teachers organizations and just about everybody else who has an interest in public education have been harping on the homework gap and how we need billions of dollars nationwide to equalize the terrain for kids, between kids who have broadband access and kids who don't. They may not have it because of remote rural areas, or it may be because they live in an area where there's service, but they can't afford it. And apparently there was bipartisan agreement that we needed, to have this homework gap funding, that it would be funneled through the FCC's E-rate program, which is already in existence. It would just, slide right on through there. And at the last minute, that funding was stricken from the negotiations. So there is some broadband funding in this new COVID bill. It's a little more temporary. There is some relief for low-income families. So there is. I don't want to give you the impression that there's nothing in there for broadband, but it's not nearly enough, and it's really not what we had hoped for. Fortunately, I think the person who was behind that money being sort of hijacked at the last minute will no longer be working for the federal government on January 21st. So we should be in better shape there, and we may have a Federal Communications Commission that will be more amenable to that remedy. But we really need all of you in your interactions with your new members of Congress and with your veteran members of Congress, House of Representatives, or your senator. We need to keep hitting that hard. So as you know, I could go on about this for days, and Lou would help me, but we only have half hour left on this show, and so I'll just leave that there. But I think that pretty well covers what I wanted to cover for the COVID bill, and I would be happy to take any questions. And also, of course, GA, anything you have to add too.
Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, well, as we wait on any potential questions that might come in, I want to keep us focused on some of the federal news. The big news last night, of course, was the Secretary of Education resigning, I believe, effective sometime today. The big question really is, with only 2 weeks left in the current administration, how big of an impact, if any, does that have? But Leah, GA, what do we know about that, and what do we know about the new interim secretary here?
It doesn't really have any immediate impact. Secretary DeVos only had a couple of weeks left in her tenure, and anything that she might have tried to put into effect at the sort of the last minute would most likely be counteracted by the incoming secretary designee. But so it really doesn't have much of a impact on education. It certainly was a symbolic thing that she felt like she should do, but really I think what we need to be doing now is focusing on Secretary-elect or Secretary designee Cardona, who is the sort of the Randy Watson of Connecticut, I guess would be a good way to put it. And I know the NSBA staff have had good meetings with him. And I know my colleague, the Connecticut Association of School Boards lobbyist, and the Connecticut School Attorneys representative all speak very highly of Mr. Cardona. They say that he is a very good, inclusive kind of person, and they are very pleased with that pick. And GA, what are you hearing from your national organization?
And I'll tell you, we'll see a little bit of a difference this year, because this is someone that's recently was in the building as a building
Yeah.
leader, as a building principal. With Secretary Duncan, you know, this was an individual that did lead a larger school district from one standpoint, but he relied on individuals like Deb Delisle and those individuals that were more building level or district level oriented, that knew the traditional districts, what we look like in Kansas, for example. I think this secretary is going to be, obviously he's a lot younger, probably going to bring a lot more energy to the position, and probably have a much better picture of what our schools look like. And many of you know, Connecticut is traditionally has some of the top test scores and top learning opportunities for kids. And so I think we're going to see a lot of good ideas, fresh ideas that are going to come out of there. I don't think we're going to have to worry from the federal level about the vouchers and tax credits conversations that we have been over the last 4 years. But I do believe, some of the things that we understand as challenges in Kansas are going to be challenges that he's very familiar with, and are going to be able to address those. And I will point this out, though. One of the things you always have to keep in mind, and we were fortunate, even with the most recent Secretary of Education, the U.S. Department of Education is an enormous staff. And those staff members are, for the most part, are not leaving. And so, when you look at the details and we use the example devils in the details, these members have been there for a long time, and they have very, very proud views of the way they look at the Department of Education and the practices that they have there. So this education commissioner is going to have to work through that staff as well to make things the way he wants them to be, because it doesn't change just because the leadership changes. Those people are well versed in what they do. They're very comfortable with what they do, and it takes a little time to change mindsets. Leo, I'll pass it back over to you.
I think that covers it pretty well. I do want to kind of remind people not to be sort of, I don't want to raise controversy, but, a couple of weeks ago, Secretary DeVos was exhorting her employees in a letter to, be the resistance as a new administration comes in. So it's not as if Secretary Cardona is going to be able to just walk in and wave a magic wand and all will be well. It will take some time. That being said, I think we do have some good things to talk about as far as what the Biden administration's agenda for K-12 education would be. And I kind of wanted to loop in Scott and Mark about this. The president's platform, President-elect's platform, has been to increase education funding quite a bit, to invest, from birth, and some things like that. So Scott and Mark, and GA too, would you like to kind of join the conversation about some of the things that we think we'll see from the Biden administration moving forward? For instance, I know they have a platform that they would like to fully fund IDEA within 10 years. And, that's certainly not something that's solely a Democratic issue. Our very own just retired Republican Senator Pat Roberts was really a force behind that in Congress. And so that's one item that we know the Biden administration would like to focus on. Scott and Mark, GA, you want to add anything else? Or any other topic?
That's a good topic to bring up, because I think, the good news, there's good news and bad news. The good news for President-elect Biden, of course, is that he won. And he comes in with a Democratic majority in the House and probably the Senate. The bad news is those are very slim majorities. So some of the expansive things you may read on his website may have difficulty, but things like IDEA and those kind of bipartisan things, I think he'll have an easier time accomplishing. You mentioned that he wants to triple the funding in Title I. He wants some kind of requirement that schools would provide competitive pay and benefits for teachers. And I think, as has been said earlier, Biden is not a friend of vouchers. Um, and in some other ways, things that I think can be done administratively. He has talked about reversing the Trump administration's issues on transgender students and things like that. So, I think, some things he'll be able to accomplish maybe administratively, and the things that he has to go to Congress with are just going to have to be, there's going to have to be compromise to get those kinds of things done. And I'll just add one thing. He has been a big proponent of expanding funding for broadband for schools.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the administration is going to be wanting to spend a lot more. I guess the question is whether you reach some limit of political appetite or economic ability to to deficit spend to do all of that. But it's clearly going to be a different view than what we've had now. Just because I always like, to be the slightly contrary one, or just maybe look at it in a different sense. Do think it's important to understand that, or to kind of remember that um, many people look to the federal government. We from a school viewpoint may look to the federal government potentially for more funding or block bad things to happen. But in our discussion with Representative Patton, of course, we were also talking about local control. And remember, a more active Department of Education may also be more prescriptive, and some things may seem a little less a good idea at the local level if we're being told we have to do it. I don't think anybody doesn't want to have competitive teacher salaries, but do you want the federal government directing how much money you have to pay teachers in whatever the circumstances may be, or a different perspective on student rights, employee rights, or all of those things? So there will be things that I think from KASB and kind of the general perspective of most education groups will like, but I think it's important to understand there are a lot of other actors out there who don't always see their friendly neighborhood school board as an ally and think that we need to be pushed to do some things that we may not be doing. So I'll just throw that out there as well, see if anyone wants to react to that.
Mark, I think you make a great point. And as Scott talks about bipartisan activities to make some of these things move forward, I think that's exactly what you look at when you're anytime you look at additional dollars through IDEA or at risk. There's probably going to be someone on the other side that's going to say, well, what are the expectations? And we need to set expectations. And those are things that we often run into as our biggest challenges. The money always looks good, but when we have to hit a certain performance level or a certain mark, that makes it a little bit more difficult. And I think those are things we're going to have to keep a very close eye on. Oftentimes, those are things that kind of go under the radar until the last minute, or until the actual edict comes down from the Department of Education that here's the dollars, but here are the strings that are attached to those dollars. So I think we have to be very aware and very cautious as we continue to move forward. I don't think anybody's going to be disappointed if we can continue those to grow those IDEA dollars and get closer to that 42%, because as I'm looking here at Ron Traxon on my screen, as Ron has to make fewer transfers to special education, that means more money in his general fund. That's a win for everybody. And so those are things that we're very, very excited about as we move forward. But I think the big piece that I hope we see from the Biden administration are those incentives to help bring additional folks into the education realm, bringing new teachers in, helping entice young individuals to see education as a path for their future, because we're seeing a great deal of expertise and experience that are retiring right now, and it's great to see new leaders step up. But as new leaders step up, we have to replenish what we have in our teaching ranks, and we just don't have what we once had. And so those enticements and incentives to bring people into education as a career path, I think are going to be as important as anything that the Biden administration is able to do.
You know, the platform also mentions doubling the number of school psychologists and counselors and nurses and social workers. I think that's probably something that has some bipartisan agreement around it. And especially as we've talked about the impact of remote learning on kids and their mental health and some of the social needs that we see that you know has become really clear that our schools provide every day. So yes, I think there's a lot to be hopeful about, and we'll have to see how the bipartisanship works out there. There was a question I got in the chat about extension of the FFCRA in the new administration. You know, the leave that was required to be extended to folks. We believe that there is an intent to extend that leave, but that's about all that I know about it at this point. GA, have you heard anything about that?
No, just the same thing as you, Leah. Just there's an intent there, but again, that's when you look at some of the new ESSER dollars that are coming through. That may be a way to help cover those leaves and allow districts to do what they would like to do and be flexible.
Leah, Mark, Scott, GA, what might we expect or what have you heard regarding any additional COVID relief to schools or individuals in a new administration? Leah, I think you're muted.
No one feel bad if that's you today, because now I've done it. We do know that that's been something the president-elect has expressed support for. I think the key is going to be that razor-thin margin that may exist in the Congress. We know that overall, the House of Representatives has been much more enthusiastic about additional levels of funding than has the Senate. Now, with the Senate now appearing to be under Democratic control as a result of the Georgia Senate elections this past week, that may change. But Scott, Mark, and GA, you want to talk a little bit about that kind of very thin margin, and it may take a vote from the vice president to break any ties, and so fingers crossed. And I think something will happen, but I don't know what the levels might be and how long that might take.
I would just note that the Georgia election has not yet been fully certified.
Well, that's correct.
And I guess I've heard it said, if any of you follow politics, it all comes down to what Joe Manchin wants to do.
Yeah.
With literally a tied vote and the vice president casting that. And that, of course, is assuming that it is a vote in the Senate that only takes 50, which I believe, experts could help me if I'm wrong, only once a year can you pass a bill with 50 votes that can't be filibustered at a 60 vote threshold. So essentially, everything that the new administration wants to do, unless they get bipartisan support, has to be bundled into one big bill. And so that is why the Senate majority being tied and apparently allowing the Democrats to be in control by one vote will certainly make it that they won't be the ability to block what the administration wants to do, but that's not a guarantee that the administration will be able to easily do new things they want to do.
Well, and also the new stimulus law, if I'm remembering, does not include any funding for state governments.
Right.
So the pressure will be probably from the governors in the next stimulus law to include that kind of funding so that they won't have to cut education and those kinds of things. So that might produce a little bit more bipartisanship if the governors are leaning on the feds to do something for them.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you, Scott. I don't think we'll see anything soon, necessarily directly to education. I think there's some other priorities: the stimulus funds, even the tax. Excuse me, not the tax scholarships, but the student loans. Some of those things, I think those will get some greater attention, probably before any new dollars come to education directly. And I think maybe how we see education dollars from the new administration are going to be in other ways. I don't think we'll see direct relief, COVID relief. I think they'll be packaged into other programs or other ways that they come down to education.
Well, if anyone in the Zoom has any questions specifically about some of the federal issues that we're looking at right now, feel free to drop those in the chat. As we wait on any of those to come in, I want to shift gears a little bit and turn our attention back to some of the state politics. And Mark, we'll start with you. Maybe not surprisingly, you spent a big chunk of your holiday break doing some deep research dives and writing some long form blogs. So what did you find while the rest of us were enjoying a little bit of snow and hot cocoa?
Well, I want to make sure, that doesn't do any good to write if it isn't read right. Actually, that's never bothered me very much. But Austin, for those that haven't noticed, want to commend you and your team on a change to our KASB website. It may look a little bit different, but you can still find a lot of our resources if you look on our homepage on the Advocacy tab. But now under the KASB News tab is where you can find not only our news stories, but blogs, research, and special reports. If you search through that, a couple weeks ago, I posted a blog that I think may be entered in the chat about what school leaders can expect from the upcoming session, which really just kind of walks through what to look at. More detailed, we've posted both an overview and a more detailed report that really looks at how districts have spent increased funding over the last 20 years. We tried to really go back over a longer period of time, not just the what's happened under Gannon or what was happening before Gannon, and look at how districts spend money and what we got for it. And we don't have time to go into that now, sadly, but if you look at those, it's really designed to maybe give you some responses to this question. Well, look, we've given you billions of dollars. What have you done with it? By talking about the long-term increases in education, talking about most of that money actually went to hiring more people to do more things for students, hiring more special ed staff, hiring more counselors, keeping our class sizes low, hiring more early childhood and all-day kindergarten, those things, as well as keeping our salaries competitive because most wages rise faster than inflation, so school districts have to keep up. And then how voters have approved more funding to improve our facilities for a lot of different reasons. And finally, what the legislature has had to add to keep CAPER solvent, which has been a big part of this. So if you're looking for ways to have a conversation with people about what do we do with the money, what do we get for it, that's a fairly recent blog that I've posted. We're going to be also looking a little more detail next week about what we've done specifically over the last 3 years as funding has increased following Gannon. So just, I guess, be on the lookout for that. And if you have any questions or follow up or can help share those, we would certainly appreciate that.
The legislative session obviously starts on Monday. We heard a little bit from Representative Patton about what that might look like. But Mark, Leah, Scott, Jay, you've been tracking and noticing some significant changes to the makeup of the education committees in both the House and the Senate. So do you want to provide some insight to our guest today on what that looks like and what that might mean in this legislative session?
Well, again, I will just start, and I'm not going to give you a whole long list of names. There may be a blog on that coming, but just a couple of observations that I think are worth noting. Even though all of the education committee, we really talk about 3 education committees, and remember, there's a whole lot of bills that we follow that don't go through those committees, particularly that go through the appropriations, ways and means committees, but many others. But of the Senate Education, House Education, and House K-12 Budget Committee, the chairs are all the same, but there's considerable change in the members. For example, Senate Education, while Molly Baumgardner is back as chair, Senator Sykes is the new ranking minority member. Senator Erickson, a new member of the Senate and former House member, former school board member, school administrator, and teacher, also with a lot of background, is the new vice chair of the Senate Education Committee. Other than Senator Pat Petty returning, every other member of that committee is basically new, most of them freshmen. So that just gives you an example of a committee where most of the people on that committee have not dealt with those issues before, at least on that committee. Similarly, the House Education Committee, it's only about 4 of the 21 members that are back from last year. Most of the leadership is back, but many of the rank and file members are new, and many of them are new to the legislature. That's going to be true of many committees, and will underscore again what Representative Patton said. Most legislators, unless they come in with a strong education background, simply don't know an awful lot about how we operate schools, how the funding formula works. There will be plenty of other people trying to tell them what the facts are and what's good and what's bad. And if you, as school leaders, don't come forward as a reputable source of information from your own district, or sharing, with some of the things we try to provide for you, they're not going to hear that side. So it's really critical, go back to be, I hope you've been working to establish those relationships. You'll continue to do the same. And as the session unfolds, we'll of course be telling you this bill is up in this committee and here's the members. Those of you that have the opportunity to get to know people who are on the education committees and some of the other important ones, it's really critical. You're speaking not just for yourselves, but for all of your colleagues around the state, as trying to help educate them as to the impact legislation might have. Scott, Leah, GA, what else do you think we need to be aware of?
Well, I think you mentioned that Senator Erickson is the new vice chair of education. And it's not a secret that she's a very big proponent of vouchers or increased tax credits, those kinds of things. And of course, the chair of the House K-12 committee has been a big proponent of those kinds of issues too.
Yeah, I think the other thing we need to consider is on the House K-12 budget, we did lose even on both sides, both House committees, we lost a handful of legislators that had strong education backgrounds. They were Republicans that, a couple of superintendents, actually 3 superintendents, we've lost them. They're no longer there. I think it's significant. I feel it's significant that Brenda Dietrich had moved to the Senate side when she won her election, but was not placed on the Senate Education Committee, even though there were a number of freshman senators that were put out there in education committees. I think that's significant as of being a Republican that she's not there. So I think our work's going to be cut out for us. As far as our associations, KSSA and USA, and all of our other organizations, I feel like we're going to be on defense a lot more than we have been the last couple of years. I think we're going to be talking about how we've spent the dollars and what we've been doing to keep our kids growing and learning especially over the last 8 months. And I do believe, with the exception of a school bus safety bill, that may be the only one that we bring forward from our organization as something new. So I think we're going to spend a significant amount of time in all 3 committees trying to justify the great work that our teachers and educators have been doing, and showing where we've spent the dollars, and then probably trying to push back some of the things that we've been trying to keep at bay for the last couple of years.
And I think a critical part of that, and it goes along with what GA has said, it's going to be extremely important that we explain why we are taking the positions we are, why we are using dollars, why we're concerned about things. I think we've had some conversations over the last few weeks. There may be the votes for expanded school choice, privatization, vouchers, whatever you want to call it, and simply saying, well, that's a bad idea, isn't going to be very convincing. But there are convincing reasons why, I believe. So we've got to, I believe, do a better job of talking about why do we have these positions or concerns, or how do you address some of the concerns we have? Because a lot of people are going to be looking around and saying, we've got kids out of school, we've got kids who've regressed, we're taking phone calls of frustrated parents. there's a narrative by a lot of people that our system, despite being successful in many ways, hasn't served every child well. So we're going to have to talk about what is our answer to do that, and how are we going to help make up the ground that was lost? How do we continue to be safe for our staff, and how do we make sure that whatever the state does, it tries to look out for the needs of all the students, not just some of the students. And that's where I think the debate may come down. So we really would encourage you to be a part of that. And as we come close to running out of time, I'm just going to grab the coordination away from Austin again real quickly, and really go back to something we mentioned earlier. The one advantage of this more virtual environment may be that more people can testify or share information. So I think for those of you that are our faithful weekly followers, we'd really ask you to consider, it's so critical that you be part of having your voice heard. And whether that is testimony for the first time, in person, in writing, whether that is working with your colleagues to more regularly meet with your legislators in some fashion, we just have to have more voices around these issues than just kind of the same old suspects at the State House. And to the extent that you can find parents, family members who can speak positively about what we're doing or about what our needs are, that we've got to do that, because the critics are finding people who are critical, and that story is going to be told. And so unless we are able to articulate why we've made decisions, what's behind them, how we're moving forward, what our plans are, then I don't think we're going to be very effective with a lot of these new legislators.
Mark, that's a great push. And with just the last few minutes we have here, obviously this is going to be a very strange and unique legislative session. The way in which we might normally find resources or stay up to date on what's happening is changing. We heard Representative Patton talk a little bit about that, but can the group kind of expand on what resources are available to our members and the education community so they know what's happening and how they can get involved in this legislative process?
I'm going to let some of the rest of our communication team talk about the things we're doing.
Well, we do have a new website, and really Austin and his team have been behind that. So I'd like to kind of throw it over to him. And I don't know if somebody wants to share their screen and maybe show where those items are on kasb.org. As usual, you can follow us, each of us on Twitter. Mark and Scott and I, we tweet throughout the day. And we generally do a daily Facebook Live update during the session, usually sometime in the afternoon, and we plan to continue to do those. So those are always a good way to keep up to date as far as what's going on as far as KASB's daily communications vehicles.
Yeah, we did roll out a new website, and I'd share my screen, but I don't have that power. So either Lauren can hand that over to me, or we can just walk through it real briefly.
I think I can share it here.
Perfect. As she gets that pulled up, I'll just say the key pieces on the new website for advocacy purposes are obviously going to be under our advocacy tab. We have a lot of critical resources and information there for people to access, including legislative information, trends and topics, KASB's positions and testimony, the opportunity to find your representatives based on your school district, and a lot of other resources that are just geared at helping you understand what's happening at the Capitol and understand how you can get in touch with your representatives and your leaders in that space. As Mark mentioned, we also have a new KASB newsroom. You can go there to get any of our up-to-date articles, our blogs. It's going to be jam-packed with stories all focused on the legislative session here in the coming weeks and months. That's probably your primary resources if you were looking for information on what's been happening in the legislative process. And of course, you can follow us on social media. Make sure you're registered to get our daily and weekly email pushes. We're going to do everything we can to make sure you have access to information in a year that's very unique and just a little bit strange. Leah, Scott, Mark, did I miss anything on our end? And if not, GA, what can people expect from your associations?
So obviously we work very closely with KSB through this process. It makes, Dr. Hyman and I have had this conversation a number of times, it makes no sense that we're working in opposite directions or trying to pull one group of people away from another. So we work very closely. Scott and Mark and do a lot of writing for us as we get things out. What our folks can expect to see is we do get Friday letters or newsletters out regarding what's going on, and ours are a little bit more detailed directly to the superintendents and or to special ed directors or principals as far as how bills may affect them directly or how they may affect their schools. So it's a little bit different than what they would see from a KSB generalization. We're gonna dive into them a little bit more and give them a little more personalization as it's going to relate to their school and how we could use their support. So we work very closely with KSB. We appreciate all of their support as we continue to push forward these legislative processes and work together. So if you have any questions for us, we have a couple sites on our website that you can gain access to and pay and stay addressed, but most of our stuff will come out via email on Fridays.
Great. Well, if we don't have any more questions in the Zoom, we are at our 1 hour mark. So I'd like to thank Leah, Mark, GA, and Scott for being here and continue to be fantastic resources to our members and the broader education community. As the session gets rolling on Monday, as always, know you can reach out to us at KSB. I know you can always reach out to GA and his team at USA Kansas for information, for help, for assistance. We are all here to make sure that you have what you need and that we're in this together. So we appreciate your time this afternoon. We are shifting gears a little bit. This will now be a weekly video session that we do. So in non-session times, this was happening every other week or so, but you can find us right back here next Friday at noon. We'll have updates and information from the first week of the legislative session. So we thank you all for your time and hope you have a great rest of your day and weekend.